Okay, so there we are, and we're starting the recording right now. And for those of you who don't know me that well, my name's Rolfe, and I have a background in adult learning and career development. And 2 decades ago, I began to focus on mentoring as the key strategy for people who want to progress their careers. My website, mentoring-works.com, is a central point for resources that are used right around the world to develop and support mentoring. And the link to a handout and some of the models that I'll be showing in this webinar is in the question box right now. So you should be able to see that link there. You don't need anything right now other than pen and paper, but just know that that's there. And before we finish the webinar, I suggest that you click on that link, and that will take you to the page that's set up. It's called Strategy and has lots of useful resources for people planning or managing mentoring programs. So some of the programs that I've been involved in recent years have helped keep people safe on building sites, increase the profitability and sustainability of small businesses, again helped young apprentices stay safe up those poles, and retained and developed and helped apprentices to complete their apprenticeships, developed the careers and leadership potential of young graduates, helped keep our skies safe right around Australia. And some of the programs I'm most proud of, award-winning programs, actually have contributed to equity and client services for Australian Aboriginal people. Now, by the end of this webinar, you'll have a range of methods that will allow you to measure how effective your mentoring program is. We'll be able to look at what people actually gained from mentoring and highlight ways that you might be able to improve the mentoring and the program. I make a guarantee with my webinars that you'll leave with practical information that you can use, and also have a special offer for you right at the end. So a little bit of an ad coming up right at the end. For now, I'd like to find out a little bit more about who's on the line and where you're at with your mentoring. So what you're going to see coming up right now is the first poll for this webinar, and you can choose one. You can choose more than one responses to this question. So what you're seeing there, and just click to indicate. Okay, I'm hoping that poll's coming up because I'm not seeing the votes coming in. The idea is that you click on the little box. I'm seeing it up on my screen. So what I'm looking at is, in terms of evaluating mentoring, what are you doing right now? And there are 5 responses. You can click one or more. Okay, here we go. I see those votes coming in right now. Cool. And what I'll do is I will share the aggregate with you very shortly. We've got about 63% of people have voted right now. So I'm seeing a large percentage of people have, in fact, identified success indicators and ways to measure those. Vast majority have planned monitoring follow-up with participants. Okay, 88% have voted now, so I'm going to close this off in just a second and share these results with you, because I think it's useful for us to share information together. Okay, I think that must be about everyone who is going to vote has voted. So very quickly, if you've not voted yet, just please do so. About to close it off now, and then I'll share these results. So the results will be coming up on your screen now. Yes, there they are. So what you can see there is, okay, and this is consistent with other polls I've run on webinars like this right around the world. Similar results. So of this group online today, 50% have in fact identified success indicators and ways to measure them. And what I'm hoping for those of you who've already done this, 2 things. One, you'll share and input some of your knowledge and share it with other participants on the line so we can all learn from each other. But also I'm hoping that you might get some ideas and ways to expand your ideas about success indicators. Maybe you'll find some extra ones and some new ways of measuring those. Okay, I'm really pleased to see that the vast majority, 79%, actually have planned to monitor and follow up their participants, because that's really important, not just from an evaluation perspective, but also staying in touch with those people, keeping them engaged, with the program. Okay, only about 29% have actually got a program evaluation questionnaire. Questionnaires are just one way of gathering data, and they have their limitations, and we can talk about that. Um, and 50% have devised post-program or other forms of evaluation. Again, I'm very interested to hear what forms of evaluation, and I'll welcome your input at any time. And again, just a reminder, I can see your comments as they come up, and I will read most of them out. If you want to make a comment or ask a question at any time and not have your name mentioned, please type the letters ANON for anonymous, and I'll read out your question or comment without stating your name. So feel free to share information with your colleagues on the line. It's great that we can all learn from each other. Okay, let me just put away that poll. Okay, that should disappear now, and we'll continue with our process. I want to say from the outset that you actually can't measure everything, and I've used the iceberg here as a kind of a visual metaphor for that. Really, it's literally the tip of the iceberg that we get to measure, no matter how thorough our evaluation is. Because what I've noticed over the last 20 years of evaluating mentoring programs is a lot of the benefits people and even organisation gain are subtle and possibly intangible. So like the iceberg, kind of under the surface, you can't see them or very well. Quite difficult to actually identify those things. So we're looking at the tip of the iceberg. I've also found that many of the results of mentoring are really long-term. They don't show up immediately. They don't show up in the weeks or even the months straight after the mentoring program has closed. They could flourish years later, and that's kind of difficult to follow up. I'll be interested to hear from you what sort of longer term follow-up you do of your mentoring programs, if you are willing to share that. And the final point, you really can't measure everything because some things just remain unknown. People just are unaware, unconscious of the changes. And if you're like me and keep a journal, and sometimes flick back, years ago or even weeks or months ago, and you look at where you're at back then, and you haven't noticed the perceptible steps and changes that you make, but you are in a different place now to where you were weeks, months, or years ago, and you haven't noticed that as you're going along. But if you keep a journal, you go back and you can make that connection. So a lot of that would remain unconscious if you haven't got that sort of thing in place. Now, I wanted to talk about first up why you want to evaluate mentoring. So I'd like some responses here. Again, reminding you, type ANON if you don't want me to mention your name. But why? Why do you want to evaluate? There's no right or wrong. I'm asking for your opinions here to share with other participants. So start typing those in right now. Why? Why would you want to evaluate your mentoring or your mentoring program? Because I believe that whether you use sophisticated metrics or simply ask participants, it is important to gain feedback on mentoring to evaluate a number of things. Okay, I'm going to pause and start reading some of your comments now. So Lynn is saying for continuous improvement, also helps with testimonials to gain further work. Yeah, and not just to gain further work too. Testimonials are one of your best methods of attracting mentors and people you want to be mentored. People are more likely to believe comments from people they either know and like, or people who are like them. So if you can get testimonials from mentors saying what they personally have gained from the mentoring relationships and program, you're able to use those to attract mentors to your next program. Likewise with your participants, I call them mentorees. They might be students or whatever you might call them. Testimonials from those people saying how much they benefited, how much they gained, and what specifically they gained. You can use for your marketing for your actual mentoring program. So thanks for that, Lynn. Doug is saying to show business value to the organisation. Again, very important. And I come from a consulting to organisations, often to companies, also to non-profit organisations, but you certainly want to show the business value to the organisation. After all, they invest in this. That's why I talk about return on investment. Okay, Karen is saying to demonstrate effectiveness. Great. Jackie says what worked and didn't work to refine the program. Effectiveness of program, Vinny is saying. Benefits for participants from Jackie. Justify future funding for the program. Yeah, really important. Agree regarding continuous improvement. Thanks, Karen. Okay, Peter's saying measure so we can improve. Improvements of the process and improvements, benefits achieved. Thank you. Karen says to improve program participation. Yes. Marianne says to gain feedback from participants to improve program and also for information to give potential funders. I work in a not-for-profit area. So thanks for sharing that, Marianne, because not-for-profit organisations need to attract funders, whether it's from within the organisation, even though it's a not-for-profit, you often have income and a responsibility to apply that income only in ways where it's going to be effective, but also attracting external funding, sponsors, generous people who give their funds. Okay, and Minnie's saying to identify the need for future programs. Yes, that's a very good point, and thanks for making that, Vinnie. Okay, so lots of reasons there. Usually you need to identify measurable outcomes that will indicate a return on investment. You certainly want to evaluate whether the relationships worked, whether mentoring actually made a difference in the areas you wanted it to, and if it contributed worthwhile organisational outcomes. Now, occasionally an organisation is more concerned with living its espoused values, and return on investment is a bonus or not even a consideration. But nevertheless, you need to know if the program is achieving its purpose. Now, mentoring, I believe, aims to achieve strategic value for organisations, even if they're a not-for-profit organisation. I know there's lots of universities on the line today, other sorts of not-for-profit organisations out there as well as companies. Nevertheless, all of this applies equally to not-for-profit as well as for-profit type organisations. All of those organisations are looking for or can achieve strategic outcomes. Now, the model in front of you is one of the ones you can download from my website. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail this time. There's this whole series of webinars this year, and I'll come back to this model from time to time. I just wanted to show it to you right now because this is the strategic planning process that I use, that is part of the award-winning process that I've used. And quickly, it's divided into 4 main areas: planning your mentoring, promoting or marketing the mentoring, preparing your participants, and then the program of support that you put in place. And I wanted to illustrate to you my strong view and recommendation is planning your evaluation process should be a part of the very front end of your planning. It's not something you do as an afterthought. It's not something you do at the end. You actually plan it right at the beginning. Determine the evaluation criteria and the methods of monitoring and gathering feedback. If you do this at the beginning, you will get a better program. And I have seen many cases where by examining our evaluation criteria, so what was it we were trying to achieve? Why were we doing the mentoring? How would we measure that? By doing that at the beginning, it actually changes the shape of your program. And even if it doesn't change it, it really helps you to focus on what you're trying to do and has a lot of benefits. So that is my recommendation to you. So the 4P model is the name of this particular model, and you can download it later if you need to. So another model, and the reason why this is part of your planning process right at the beginning is illustrated on this model that shows how we specify objectives. Again, this model you can download from the website, and I'm also going to quickly run through a case study that demonstrates it. So it has 3 levels. The top level is what I've called the aim. So I'm looking at this from an organisational perspective. There are organisational needs driving your mentoring program. You might have not stopped to analyse these at this point. A lot of people start their process of planning at the mid-level, which we'll get to in a moment. But you need to kind of step up a level and have a look at the organisational needs that are driving this. You need to identify the strategic value that mentoring will add to the organisation for all of the reasons that you talked about before when I asked you why do you want to evaluate. So the mid-level then is your focus, and this is typically where most people begin, because this is where we look at our target group. Who are the people who are going to be mentored, and why do we want to mentor them? So in other words, the purpose of the mentoring. And then we get down to the bottom line, the objectives. And this is where we'll be operating today, because we're going to be looking at specific outcomes and how will we measure them. So this is a template, if you like, for specifying objectives of your mentoring program, but it's part of the process of planning your evaluation and in fact planning the program right from the start. So let me real quick run through a case study. I've used this case study before. If you've been on my webinars before, you've seen and heard it. I'll go through real quick so it doesn't bore you, but for those of you who haven't seen it before, this will be useful to you to illustrate the model that I just showed you. So we're looking at the aims of a mentoring program. This is actually a composite of several programs that I worked on a few years ago. So, and this program too actually did start at the mid-level. So I'll give you a heads up on that right now. But what we did was the mid-level, this organisation had already decided that it needed a mentoring program for women. And the reason it needed that program, or the strategic or the organisational need, was actually in Australia. The law was changed and it was legislated, so there was a compliance issue. So all organisations over a certain size had to actually report their equity outcomes to ASIC. So there was a compliance issue there. Interestingly enough, when people within the organisation started to go into this a little bit deeper and analysing the strategic value of possibly mentoring women, they discovered some other benefits to the organisation. They realised we're facing skill shortages here in Australia, and mentoring women would be a way to avoid that. They also realised that they could up their status as employer of choice if they provided more opportunities to develop women. They also saw that they could lower their recruitment costs because they could grow their talent from within the organisation. And lo and behold, it's now well documented around the world that organisations that have more women in senior levels actually outperform those that don't on all sorts of bottom line measures. So they already had their focus. They already knew that what they wanted to do was develop their high potential women, and they specified high potential women in this particular case. If I have time, I'll tell you another illustration of another women's program. Okay, and they wanted to develop the leadership skills of those women. So then we come down, bottom line, our focus today is, okay, we need specific objectives so we can look at what outcomes we intend to produce and how we'll measure them by evaluation. So some of the things that we identified for that program were that we'd have more women identified in the leadership pipeline. We'd have more women actually in senior roles. We'd have greater talent retention and more female applicants, both internal applicants for positions, senior leadership positions, and more female external applicants in what was a male-dominated organisation. Pretty easy things they are to measure, because you simply take a before measure. So before you've intervened and introduced your mentoring program, how many women do we have in the leadership pipeline? What percentage? of women were there in the senior roles? What was our talent retention figure, and how many female applicants did we have for internal applicants and external applicants? You measure that before, you've got good hard data, and then you measure afterwards. Now, you again, remembering that some of these results may take a little while, so you'd want to do measures at the end of the program, sure, but in a short space of time, you will have made some difference, but you also want to measure, say, 6 months later, 12 months later, 2 years later, 3, even 5 years later, and following perhaps some of the participants in that program to get your good hard data. This is why I use this model, even when people come to me and say, okay, we want to mentor this particular group and we want to develop their whatever it is. I always chunk that up, go up a level. So why do we want this? From the individual perspective, yeah, that's pretty easy. But from the organisational perspective, because in the long run, this is where you need to kind of justify your funding, show your effectiveness, and show the strategic value of what you're doing. So I hope that's a useful model to you. I'm going to pause for questions in just a moment. You can start typing them in now if you wish, or you can put your hand up if you want to speak on the microphone. Please do so. Comment questions at any time, reminding you that type in the letters ANON if you want me not to suggest your name. Okay, going to give you I think I've kind of covered this one already. You need to have your objectives specific, clear, meaningful, measurable, because if you don't, you can find it difficult to gain the support that you need in the longer term. I do find that mentoring tends to be a bit flavour of the month. You know, you might have a champion at senior levels and they move to another organisation, or they take up other duties or go elsewhere, and so your mentoring programs support can diminish in a hurry. But if you've got this data, then you can make a case to the next person. So gaining support, demonstrating the value, and keeping it a high priority. This table, sorry, it's a little bit busy here, but I'm just showing you. Now, this is at that top level of that previous diagram, showing you the sorts of organisational needs, because a lot of organisations, their mentoring is around employee engagement. So that's the organisational need. Or it might be knowledge management, or it might be skill development, could be succession planning, could be diversity and equity. So that's the organisational need on the left-hand side. Then on the right-hand side, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to have another poll in a moment. I'm going to be asking you, what is the organisational need strategic value for the program that you're involved with right now? So the employee engagement, organisational need, the strategic value of that is we attract, we retain, we develop our people. And the bottom line is increased productivity for the individuals and the organisation. Knowledge management, it's about preventing the loss of tacit and implicit information, so that information and knowledge that's kind of in our heads, not easy to document, not easy to necessarily extract and share. And with an ageing population, as people leave an organisation, maybe they walk out the door and all that knowledge goes with them. So skills development, the strategic value of that is the increased capacity of individuals and the organisation. Succession planning, the need, the value is a pipeline of leadership talent for the future. And this is a hot topic in a lot of organisations. And that diversity and equity, sometimes organisations merely introduce it because they have to, so for compliance, but actually, and this is where you can get a lot of leverage, the research is out there, the documentation is out there. Diversity improves organisational performance in all kinds of bottom line ways. Okay, so let me now ask you, I'm going to have another poll here. You can also be typing in questions and comments at any time, but the poll is coming up there. Now, I can't remember whether I said this was going to be a one or more choice on this one. Sorry about that. Try it and see. Okay, so what is the organisational need and strategic value of your mentoring program? I'm seeing those coming in right now. Okay, so it looks as though, yes, you can choose more than one. I'm seeing that from the data coming in. We've got nearly half of you have voted, so keep going with those votes coming in. Okay, we've got nearly 70% have voted. So what is the purpose? Or I should say, what is the organisational need? So we're looking at the high level need now, not so much the individual benefits on this one. And even if you're a not-for-profit, this still applies. There are still strategic reasons why your organisation, say a university, might have a retention of students, for example, doesn't quite fit. So if you've got something, a reason that doesn't quite fit, type in the comments and I'll read that out. Okay, I'm thinking that we're close to done with the poll. Keeping an eye on the time here. Pretty close to on time. Okay. Okay, I think everyone who wanted to vote has voted. If you didn't vote, if your program didn't fit, please type in your comment and I'll read that out. So I'm going to close the poll, share the results now. Okay, we've got 83% of people voted, so that was close to what voted last time. Okay, so look at that. Okay, so looks like employee engagement to attract, retain and develop people. I guess it might have been student retention for some of the universities out there. Engagement would fit for you perhaps. So 80%. Now these add up to more than 100% because you could choose more than one category and your programs might fit. Okay, I'm seeing a comment coming in. Okay. So Lynn is saying mentoring a cultural group with the emphasis on the culture rather than the organisation or the business. Thanks for sharing that, Lynn. Okay, so we're seeing knowledge management to prevent loss of tacit information, not such a big one. Skills development, improve capability, that is a big one. Succession planning, and not so much on the diversity, but 33%, that's not bad, okay. Keep comments or questions coming in. I will pause from time to time. Okay, I'm going to put that away now. Okay, so there's that diagram again, and as I said, often I find that people are starting here in this mid-level. They've identified a target group and a purpose or a reason to mentor them. I've just been talking about the higher level, the aims, the organisational need and the strategic value. So, but once you've identified that high level, then we go back and we analyse some more. And again, one of the reasons we do this is because sometimes it actually changes the target group and the purpose. And I will just briefly tell you about another organisation I went to many years ago here in New South Wales, Australia. The then state government, the Premier of New South Wales, actually specified that in the public sector, he wanted to see an increased percentage of women in the senior level. They call it the SES at that time, Senior Executive Service. So he put a number on that and he said, okay, I want this percentage of women in the SES by, and I think it was way back, I think it was the year 2000 or 2005 or something like that. So I was called into an organisation who said, okay, we want to set up a mentoring program. We're going to target entry-level women and bring them up through the ranks. And I said to them, sorry, that's not going to work. It's a noble cause, and by all means set up a mentoring program for those entry-level women, but you have been tasked to increase the number of women at the senior levels within the next, I think it was 3 to 5 years. You're not going to do that by mentoring entry-level women. Do you see where I'm coming from here? So what what we had to do was refocus our target group. And what we did instead was we set up a mentoring program for women, for high potential women, for women who was closer to that SES. They might have been a rank or two below, and they had a better chance of making that leap across the Great Divide from where they were to where we wanted them to be, so the more senior levels. So we had to hand pick the women or target the women who were closer to the end result. And please feel free to make some comments on that. So by looking at what the organisational need was, in this case, again, it was a compliance issue. The target had been set from them by the Premier of New South Wales, but they'd picked the wrong target initially. We had to refocus and relook at our purpose, because then we were going to get down to these outcomes and measures. So we're looking at other sorts of purposes you could have. You could look at support for new employees or another target group. It could be to develop particular target group. It might be career planning develop. So I'm looking at the purpose now of mentoring, leadership development, professional, personal planning and development, improving communication across the organisation, even sharing that tacit information, building relationships, and those are the sorts of purposes you might have for mentoring. So now we get to the bottom line, where our real focus is today. I had to do all that as a way of pre-framing or setting up why we need this in order to get to our objectives, our outcomes, and our measures that we're going to evaluate. So we've looked at the strategic aims. So I'm assuming now we've got strategic aims, and most of you have identified those. You've also, no doubt, got a program purpose. So now what I want you to think about, and by all means start typing these in, because I'm going to give you 30 seconds of silence in a moment while I catch my breath to respond to what do you think for your particular program. And I won't read out names for this one. I'll simply read out what you type in. For your program, what do you think? Now, 50% or so of you said you'd already done this, so we should have some good information to share here. What might indicate success for your program? What could you measure? Are there tangible outcomes, or are there other things that would let you know? I'm particularly interested in these last ones because we might be able to together brainstorm and figure out some ways of actually measuring those perhaps intangibles. So 30 seconds of silence from me. I'm going to take a sip of my cup of tea to soothe my voice as you start typing in. What might indicate success for your program? What might you measure? Are there tangible outcomes? How else would you know? I'm going to pause while you type in your responses to share. I won't be reading names, just sharing what you're going to type in. Okay, I'm seeing some responses coming in now. I'm just going to start to read those out, but I won't read names for this one. Okay, great. So increased levels of faculty satisfaction and retention at a university. Okay, excellent. And so there's two separate issues there. One is retention. Now that's a good hard measure. You can do a before and after measure and get real numbers. Faculty satisfaction, I'm sure you have some methods of surveying that or gauging that. It is more subjective, but it is important, and you may be able to put some numbers around that too. Okay, great. Thanks for that one. Okay, systemic processes implemented to manage and develop skills within the business. Excellent. Thanks for sharing that one. I'm hoping that each of you, as I'm reading these out, you might jot down ones that you're not currently using that you might actually want to add to your repertoire of evaluation. Okay, so what might indicate success? Increase in engagement increase in leadership capacity in the organisation. Thanks for that. Mentoree satisfaction, 1, with the program. 2, support within the institution. 3, confidence in developing career plans. Excellent measures. Okay, students stay at university and manage their move from rural areas to urban. Excellent. So again, there's the retention and the management of that issue. Okay, so this one, our program is for first-year apprentices. We are targeting work ethic. Previous experience indicated poor attendance. For this program, we are focused on work ethic. Secondly, it's about the apprentice developing good learning in both formal and informal settings. Be interesting to know how you measure that if you want to share that. Okay, increased capabilities. Okay, good. Indicators of success we're looking at. A group that continues to network together and support each other. Action taken towards goals, whether that be implementing a cultural program or career progression. Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, program participation and completion rates for rural, remote and low SES participants, so social economic status participants. Excellent. Mentees volunteer. Oh, I love this. Mentees volunteer to be mentors in the following year. They've had a good experience. Yes, that's terrific. Okay, so moving on. Just reminding you where we're at here. So we've looked at organisational needs, strategic value, looked at the need to focus on our target group and purpose. Now we're working in the area of objectives, the outcomes and the measures, as we start to move on to look at some more practical stuff in the terms of how to. So you'll need to consider that some measures will be qualitative. So that is they're subjective, they're still valid and important, and some of these I believe you can turn around and put some numbers around, but qualitative stuff, basically that's the participants' opinions. Then there'll be the quantitative stuff, the numerical and statistical, that you'll be wanting to have a good look at as well. So in terms of return on investment, I'm returning to this idea because it is so important for many organisations. And you might want to type in if you've got your head around, okay, we're looking at return on investment for my organisation. We've invested in mentoring. What is the return that we can point to for the organisation? You might want to type in your examples here again. We've already talked about staff retention. Another program I looked at was return to work after maternity leave. Westpac Bank was one of the first organisations. I'm going back over 20 years now, and they introduced a mentoring program for women taking maternity leave because they recognised that if they could not bring those women back, they were likely to lose all of that accumulated knowledge and experience, and they valued it. They saw the value in that. So they set up a mentoring program. Of course, mentoring alone is not going to address that issue. There are a whole bunch of other issues, and I think that's an important topic that we'll address in a later webinar. Okay, representation of your target group in various grades, roles, positions and locations. So if you've got a distinct group, whether it's women, whether it's Aboriginal people or English as a second language, or a particular group that you're focusing on, your young graduates or whatever, again, you can measure that and see where they're at. Percentage of applicants for internal jobs or promotions. So again, you can cut your costs if you've got internal applicants who will fill particular jobs. So you can look at that as a pointer to return on investment in mentoring, if mentoring can be shown to increase that. The number of target group who obtain positions or a position or a promotion, the number of the target group participating in training programs and development opportunities, and number of external applicants for jobs, and you might have some benchmark comparisons for your industry. And these may be ways to show return of investment on your program. Okay, so you might like to be typing in. I'm going to continue, but you might want to type in. I'll come back. If you've got particular outcomes that you've measured, um, for your program that you would like to share with us, that would be great. I'm going to move on now and talk about what you want to evaluate. And there are a range of things. I believe we need to be evaluating our processes. So how did we recruit people to our program, both mentors and the people who are mentored? How did we actually find them and attract them to the program? How do we go about selecting them? Or do we just let anyone in, or do we have specific selection criteria and process? How did we match people up? And what was our communication like with people before, during, and after the mentoring program? So the actual processes that were used in our mentoring program. We also need to evaluate the mentoring itself. Were the relationships maintained? So how many people that we put together in pairs, how many of them remained in pairs and active over the life of our mentoring program? And what was the quality of the mentoring like over the program? Then we want to look at our program of support, the training that we gave people, the materials and resources that we supplied them with, the support activities that were part of the program. Evaluate them. How good were they? Do we need to improve them? Were they widely used? Were they valued? And finally, of course, the outcomes, which is what we've been talking about up until now. Outcomes for mentorees, obviously, but also outcomes for mentors. And everywhere I go, really great mentors tell me that they get, some of them say they get as much, if not more, from the mentoring relationship as do the mentorees. So you want to have a methodology for actually capturing that feedback as well. And again, you're perhaps using it in testimonials, as we talked about at the beginning. And of course, the outcomes for the organisation as well. I'm pausing to read some comments that are coming in now. Okay, so one thing that Marianne measures is completion of the university degree. And I have seen some pretty frightening statistics around people who do not complete. I hesitate to call them dropouts, but people who do not complete their degree. And there's a huge cost to universities. Actually, I found some numbers on that recently. I don't have them in my head at the moment. But yes, there's some dollar figures. The cost to university, you can Google or search cost to universities of non-completion of degrees, and you'll find some articles out there, Marianne, if you don't already have those, that show some millions, if not billions of dollars being lost by university because people don't complete their degrees. And that's before we even start to think about the cost to that individual. I hate to think that I didn't complete a course, and I feel bad about myself. And how does that play out on that individual, their family, their community, etc.? Another thing you can measure, contact mentoring needs identified in the initial mentoring agreements that are met. Okay, good measures there. Okay, let's continue on. As I said, I believe that planning your evaluation is something you do right at the beginning in the planning of the entire program. But if you didn't, it's not too late, but it's most useful when you do it at the beginning. So to do that, it means that you need to have a good picture of the attributes of success. So what does success look like? You need to think about, well, what information will I need before I start and after? Where will I get that information? So in other words, data sources, the strategies or methodologies that you're going to use to gather your data. And the other thing I've put here that we need to be really aware of, and that is extraneous factors. When we're making our claim to fame with mentoring, we're saying, oh, yes, we did this before and after measures on here's the results of mentoring. Just be aware, unless you're doing that scientific study with a control group and you're controlling for variables, You can't be 100% sure that your results came from mentoring. So just be a little bit aware before you're making, extravagant claims. Certainly you want to be able to point to results of your mentoring, but also be aware of those extraneous factors. And that can work both ways, by the way. I remember doing a very big evaluation project, and some of the outcomes we expected, one of the measures we were looking at was increasing our target group's enrollment in training programs and attendance of conferences and things like that. And it actually decreased instead of increasing. Now, in hindsight, we could figure out why that was. People were so engaged in mentoring that they didn't go and do other things. And I know that myself. This year I'm doing a major professional development project, and therefore I'm less likely to go and do other smaller ones while I'm engaged in this big one. I'm totally invested in that particular self-development process, so I don't do smaller other things. They're put off till next year. But when we did this evaluation project, the measures we'd set, we expected them to increase, and instead they went down. So we had to explain that and look at why that was the case. So be aware of those other factors that can impact. You have a flu epidemic, or I worked with one organisation where they had actually a job freeze in the organisation. So this was a career development mentoring program, and yet there were no extra jobs, there were no promotions available for those people. The program was still a success, but the measures that we had set didn't show it up. The success that we had was that those people were amongst the most enthusiastic and engaged people in the entire organisation. And instead of spending that period of 12 months where there was a job freeze, despondent, worried, concerned, and insecure, they spent that 12 months preparing for when the job freeze ended, and they would be ready with their resumes, they would be ready with their interview preps, they would be ready with their capabilities and applications and their confidence to go for the internal positions that did come up. So, inviting your questions now. We've still got 10 minutes of our webinar left. So the methods I've already talked about, before and after measures. Reaction surveys. Now, I remember from the first poll, not a lot of people were actually going to do a program evaluation questionnaire. Be interested to know why you're not using those. I do find one of the problems myself is the low response rate we get. People are all surveyed out. So, but nevertheless, they can be quite useful. And if you can find ways, and I have found ways, to get people to complete those surveys, you can do that. A learning journal. I mentioned I like to keep a journal myself, but not everyone likes that. Some people are not in that kind of reflective learning mode. Some people really hate it and feel it's an imposition. So you can't rely on it. And of course, a learning journal is a private thing. It's not something you collect from people, but it is something, if people do keep a learning journal, and you might want to test the water and encourage them and talk to them about it. Not that you're going to take that from them at the end, but you can ask them to refer back to that and share their insights as a result. You can do a monthly informal review. So you will have a program coordinator, director, manager, whomever that person, whatever their title is, who maybe touches base informally with people on a regular basis to gather some feedback. You can do individual interviews with people during the program or at the end. You could do focus groups or workshops. I usually like to run workshops. I like to run a midpoint workshop if I can get people back together again halfway through a program, where we take a look at what's working, what's not working out so well. Halfway through, it's not too late to fix things. And I also like to do a workshop at the end where we celebrate and give closure on the program to the pairs and participants. I mean, they can continue informally if they want to, but also, again, to gather that feedback. And I do use often a survey questionnaire at the end of a mentoring program. So Okay, this slide is if you're not used to questionnaires, this is just a sample question. And one of the questions I started with is, can you turn qualitative data into quantifiable data? And here's one way you could do it. So this particular item in a questionnaire, and I'm seeing questions and comments coming in, I'll come to those in just a moment. This is a sample of a question that asks people to reflect on the specific objectives of a particular mentoring program that I ran. So the objectives of that program are reflected on the left-hand side. What we wanted people to do was reflect on their career aspirations. Our objective was that they would take ownership of their career, their own career development, and that they would set career-related goals, and that they would achieve career-related goals. So we asked each participant to let us know, did they think, or to what degree did they think that the participants, the mentorees, had reflected on their career aspirations, had taken ownership of their career development, etc. And although this particular item, I've asked them to indicate whether they strongly disagree, not sure, agree, or strongly agree. And typically you put some numbers with that. So you might have a 1 for strongly disagree, 2 for disagree, 3 is not sure, 4 is agree, and 5 is strongly agree. And then you can put some numbers around this, or you can say, even without the numbers, you could say X% of mentors strongly agreed that the graduates, for example, reflected on their career aspirations, took ownership of career development. You see where I'm going with this. So you can take what is, you're asking for participant opinion, which is subjective, which is qualitative, and yet you can come back with something that you could put numbers on and turn it into kind of hard data. And that's what I had in mind at the beginning. Okay, going to read out this comment. Okay, we provide our apprentices with reflective journals. This is particularly useful for our horticulturists, and they're used to evaluate their application of skill in a workplace environment. Excellent. Thanks for sharing that example. This is a good question. Thanks, Jackie. How does a survey questionnaire differ from a reaction survey? Okay, reaction surveys are what I use usually in workshops as we go along. So I'm looking for the participant reactions, an immediate reaction to what they've just done. What I had in mind from the survey questionnaire is something that I would do possibly at the midpoint, but certainly at the end of a mentoring program. And it, like the sample on screen at the moment, addresses the objectives of the program. So sorry for not making that distinction clearer earlier. Reaction survey, usually a workshop kind of thing. The survey questionnaire is what I'm referring to is at the end. Okay, keep your questions coming in because I'm going to come back to questions and comments. We're coming up to the top of the hour. I'm going to be wrapping this up in just a few minutes. I'll be coming back and I will hang around to answer all of your questions for as long as you need me to. In summary, what we've covered today is how to ensure your mentoring works via evaluation. Firstly, specify those objectives, and that's that model I spent a lot of time on at the beginning of the workshop, and you can download from my website. It's called Specify Objectives. You need to make sure that you've identified as many success indicators as possible. So how do you know this has worked? What sort of things would tell you? Now, another recommendation I haven't mentioned up to this point is I do recommend early follow-up. Don't leave it till the end. Don't leave it till halfway through. I suggest that you follow up with your participants and find out how things are going within the first 3 to 6 weeks. Talk to people, make sure they're okay, and make sure things are actually happening from them. And then monitor regularly. Keep in touch. It can be informal, and the more face-to-face time or talking to them on the phone or online that you can do, the better. I realise it's an imposition on your time and theirs, but if you can build a relationship with people and do that, it will work in your favour. I've mentioned already, I do like to do some kind of midpoint review. If you can get the group back face-to-face, that's a real bonus and ideal, but often you can't. And I also like to run a finale where we celebrate success and gather our final feedback. As I mentioned, and then of course there's the post-program stuff that you're going to do, maybe right at the end, maybe 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, or even longer after the program. I'm going to be coming back to you for questions and comments. I also recommend that you note for yourself, what are your key takeaways out of this webinar and what actions will you take? Note them down for yourself. If you want to type them in and share them, I'll read them out without names. I'll come back to do that in just a moment, and I will hang around to answer all your questions for pretty much as long as you like. But I just want to tell you before I do go that if you've enjoyed this webinar and found it useful, I've got a package of webinar recordings that come with my manual, how to design and run your own mentoring program. That's in ebook form, so you can download it immediately. And I will just post posting the link. No, I'm going to send you the link for this after the webinar because this is an amazing package where you get 17 webinar recordings plus every other Mentoring Works webinar I broadcast this year. I'll record and add that to the list. So you'll have ongoing access to all of these recordings plus your manual plus half a dozen ebooks on these topics as well. And all of that for just $99. So I'll send you more information about that a little bit later on. Right now, I'm going to come back for your questions, your comments, your key takeaways. So start those typing fingers. I'd love to know, as a result of the webinar today, what would be a key point for you, something you've learned, an insight that you've gained, and or what is the action that you will take as a result, and do you have any questions? So I'm going to pause now, just waiting for those questions, comments to come in, and I will respond. What are your key takeaways? What actions will you take? You know, they say knowledge is power, but I think it's what you do with knowledge that's really powerful. So what actions will you take? Just waiting for those to come in now. And I will hang around for your questions as they start to come in. I realise we have passed the 1 o'clock mark, so I know some of you have other commitments. I do too, actually, but I will hang around for a while. Okay, so key takeaway coming in. My key takeaway is to spend some time focusing on evaluation, especially or specifically identifying success indicators and planning a midpoint review. Thank you for that. You're very welcome. Okay, seeing the comments coming in. Okay, I like your indicator that the mentees volunteers as mentors. That wasn't mine. I like that one too. That came in from one of our participants. Thanks for commenting on that. Yeah, and mentors that come back. I've got some of my programs where I've got mentors coming back for the 3rd time in a row. So you know that not only they obviously volunteer for altruistic reasons, but they also see value personally and professionally and for the organisation. So they're coming back. So that's great. Okay. Need to clarify a little bit more what a successful outcome for the sponsor looks like. And that's a question you can ask your sponsors if you want. Don't put them on the spot, but kind of gently, you know, in a counselling sort of a mode. I know you'll be able to do that. What do they think success looks like? Okay, so key takeaway or action, to review the program aims and get leadership group input. Yeah, see, that's what I like to do. I like to do planning for mentoring programs in a group so that you're actually getting, you know, the synergy and the value of a lot of thoughts coming into this and all your stakeholders. Okay. Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome, Doug. Thanks for coming on the webinar. I'm going to try to get to your one pretty soon too. I know that one's coming up, so thanks, Doug. Look forward to seeing you there. Yes, mentors volunteering again. Okay, if you have another question or a comment or an action or a key takeaway to share, please type in now. Otherwise, I'm going to kind of wrap up the webinar again. Don't forget that great package. If you enjoy webinars, wow, you've got, 17 hours worth, although you can fast forward them, of course. Pause them where you need to. That's the value of the recordings. You can actually fast forward to the bits you want. You can pause at the bits you want so that you get the full value. You're welcome, Lynn. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay. Otherwise, our next webinar is coming up on the 1st of May. Okay, another comment coming in. I like the idea of mentors and mentees keeping a learning reflective journal. Do you know about any software apps that will help them create electronic versions? Not specifically, but you could. One of my clients uses Yammer, which is a Q&A type software, and we're going to use that. He's going to set up a closed group within the organisation on Yammer, which the organisation already uses, and we're going to use it for Q&As and for sharing reflections and that sort of thing. You can set up a secret group on Facebook. And by the way, like Mentoring Works on Facebook, I post quite often there, all sorts of articles and snippets and career development and ideas like that. So you could create a blog, a private blog perhaps. I'm not sure. There's probably some software out there. I don't know offhand. If anyone else knows, please let me know. You're welcome, Peter. Thanks, Catherine. Cheers to Peter. Okay. Oh, so you have Yammer, yeah, at UNE, yeah. So look at the platforms you've got. And as I said, my other client is setting up a private group specifically for participants in their mentoring programs. And that kind of builds a sense of community. I actually do set up online communities, private online communities, where we have a learning centre, where we have blogs, where we have forums, kind of like a private Facebook. And we can set up all sorts of resources there. Okay, so Peter is saying iGoals is a simple tracking interactive system. Okay, thanks, Jackie. Jackie, you're welcome. Okay, I'm going to wait just a couple more minutes. I'm actually going to stop the recording